When we're talking about a unit circle, we are talking about the circle that is created from the three main triangles that we have talked about. In geometry, we talked about two different triangles, one of them being a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the other being a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So if we look at this, if I have my 30 degrees, my 60 degrees, and obviously my 90 degrees, and here if I have my 45, and my 90, we know that these are special triangles. Across from the 30 would be a measure of 1, across from the 60 would be a root 3, which would leave our hypotenuse to be a 2. And on the 45, 45, 90, we would have 2 for our hypotenuse, a root 2, and a root 2 for our sides here. What the unit circle is now is it takes all of these measures and it puts it in terms of this one circle. So we've got a circle, it's called a unit circle. That means its radius is going to be a unit of 1. Not really necessarily a measure on that, inches, centimeters, it's just going to be a unit of 1. So the radius of our circle in our unit circle is always going to have a radius of 1. And that radius is always going to be accounted for by the hypotenuse. So we have to change our 30, 60, 90 and our 45, 45, 90 triangles to have hypotenuses of 1. If I look at my 30, 60, 90, to get this 2 to be a 1, I've got to divide by 2 and I'll get a 1. Obviously then if I divided one number by 2, I've got to divide the rest of them by 2. So root 3 is going to become root 3 over 2. And 1 is going to become 1 over 2. So my new triangle for my 30, 60, 90 is going to be 1 as my radius, 1/2 as my side across from a 30-degree angle, and then root 3 over 2 as my side that is across from a 60-degree angle. We're going to do about the same thing with a 45, 45, 90 triangle. We got to make that hypotenuse a 1. I can do the same thing. Divide this by 2, I'll get a 1. If I divide that by 2, I'll get a root 2 over 2. And this one, I'll get a root 2 over 2. So if I look at the created unit circle, I see that I have, if we just look at the first quadrant here, I've got going to be a 30-degree angle, which gives me a 60-degree and a 90-degree. Across from my 30 degree is always going to be my 1 over 2. And then adjacent to my 30 degree is going to be my root 3 over 2. And my hypotenuse is a 1. So looking at this now, my triangles that are in my first quadrant, I can look at this in terms of x and y. Typically I would call the sine of 30 degrees here the opposite over the hypotenuse, but since in this case my hypotenuse is always going to be a 1, I can actually just call my sine of 30 degrees, I can say that it's going to be equal to the y value of this point, or of this triangle, and we can see that the y value of this triangle is going to be 1/2. So the sine of 30 degrees is going to be 1/2. Now I'll do the same thing for the cosine of 30 degrees. The cosine would be the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Since my hypotenuse is a 1, the cosine is just going to become the adjacent. And in this case, it's going to be the x value. So my cosine of 30 is going to be my x value. And then my tangent would be my opposite over adjacent, which I could say is going to become my opposite, which is y, over my adjacent, which is x. So I could plug that in, and I could say it's going to become 1/2 divided by root 3 over 2. To simplify that, I will change it to a multiplication problem. It would give me 1/2 times 2 over root 3. Cross these out, I'll get 1 over root 3. If I want to do some simplification, get rid of that root 3. These two are going to cancel out and give me just a 3 on top. Root 3, my answer then would be root 3 over 3. So you can see this is kind of taking all of that stuff we were just looking at, and it's putting it onto this unit circle. So that was my 30-degree angle. Now if I want to look at my 45-degree angle, obviously the 60-degree angle is going to be the same thing, except instead of using a 30-degree angle for our reference, I'm using a 60-degree angle for my reference. Now, and if I look at the 45-degree angle, I'll have my 45 and my 45. All I got to do now is label the sides. Hypotenuse is a 1. My sides are a root 2 over 2 and a root 2 over 2. And if I go ahead and look at this, I can see my sine is going to be my y value, which is root 2 over 2. My cosine is my x value, which is root 2 over 2. My tangent now is my y over my x, which is going to give me root 2 over 2 divided by root 2 over 2. Any number divided by itself is just going to give me a 1. So that would be my tangent. But you can see that's how I'm going to use these unit circles to actually solve some problems. And let's see if I can. There we go. Let's look at some of these. If I'm looking at the cosine of a 90-degree angle, what I like to do, what I think is easiest, is if you just draw out what your angle looks like. So I've got a 90-degree angle. I'm going to have a point right about here. Now this is interesting because my 0, 90, 180, and 360, or I'm sorry, and 270, all of those angles do not actually create a triangle. But if we look at this in terms of the unit circle, this point is going to be 0 in the x, 1 in the y. If I'm trying to find the cosine of that, remember we said that the cosine is going to be equal to whatever that x value is, so I can say my cosine of 90 degrees is going to be equal to 0. If I look at my sine of 45 degrees, and I draw this out, I have 45 here, 45, and 90. So I can label my sides. Root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, and 1. My sine is either my opposite over my adjacent or my y value. I could say that that's going to be equal to root 2 over 2. Simple enough. My tangent of 30 degrees. We saw this earlier. I've got a 30 degree angle, 60 and 90. So if I start to label this, I'll have 1/2 root 3 over 2 and 1. My tangent would be my opposite or my y over my x. I could go through this, but I'll save us the time. It's going to simplify to root 3 over 3. We just did this one. Now if I look at my cosecant of 180 degrees, my 180 degrees is going to be here. So that point would be -1 in the x, 0 in the y. Cosecant, we know, is the reciprocal of sine. Sine is equal to y, so cosecant is going to be equal to 1 over y. In this case, my y is a 0. This will give me 1 over 0, which is going to be let's see if I can write it, undefined. So anytime we're dividing by 0, we're going to get undefined as our answer. Those are examples of degree measures. If if I look now at radian measures, really we're doing the same thing. We've just got to understand what the radian is in terms of the measurement. Pi is going to be the same as a 180 degree angle. So I know that pi is going to be -1, 0. If I'm talking about the cosine, I'm talking about the x value. It's going to be a -1. Sine of negative pi over 4. Pi over 4 is equal to 180 divided by 4, which is going to be talking about a 45 degree angle. So a negative 45 degree angle is going to look like this. I'll know that's 45 and 45. Got my 90. On each side I have root 2 over, root 2 over 2 and root 2 over 2. And my radius is a 1. Now sine is my y value. You can see my y value is over here, which is root 2 over 2. Very important to notice, since that is below the x-axis, that is going to be a negative value. So for number 2, I would get negative root 2 over 2. That negative is very important to make a note of. The one thing you will also realize is that the radius of your circle is always going to be positive. Cannot have a negative radius. Looking at the next one, tangent of pi over 3. Pi over 3 is going to be equal to 180 divided by 3, which is a 60 degree angle. Draw my angles, 30, 60, 90. Across from my 60 is root 3 over 2. Across from my 30 is 1 over 2. Got my 1. Tangent is going to be y over x, or opposite over adjacent. Root 3 over 2 divided by 1/2. Remember, I'm going to actually multiply by 2 over 1, so root 3 over 2 times 2 over 1. Boom, those cancel. That just leaves me with root 3. And the last one we just talked about would be our cosecant. Cosecant of pi over 6. 180 divided by 6 is going to be a 30 degree angle. 30, 60, 90. 1/2. 1. That's 1/2. There is 1/2 over there. Root 3 over 2 right. Oops, I'm a mess. Root 3 over 2 right here. And a 1 here. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Reciprocal of sine. Sine is y. The reciprocal will be 1 over y. My y value is 1/2, so my cosecant is 1 over 1/2, which is going to be equal to 2. So you can see, once I find what that reference angle is, and I can draw my triangle, it makes life a lot easier. I can then just label my sides. Once I have my sides labeled, I can actually find what the sine, the cosine, whatever it is that I'm looking for actually is. Okay, so it's not that difficult. And to leave us with, we just want to reiterate. Sine of an angle is now equal to the y. The cosine of an angle is equal to the x. Tangent is going to be our y over our x. And then our cosecant is going to be 1 over y. Secant is going to be 1 over x. Cotangent x over y. So those will be important to know. It's a good thing to know. Everything else is pretty simple when we're talking about the unit circle.